Looking at charts on the iPad is wonderful. Many apps have what we call smart charts. You can pan around and zoom in, and looking at the eastern seaboard here, you can see that most apps, as you zoom into a high traffic area like Washington, D.C., it will seamlessly switch the view of a sectional to a terminal area chart. And it's more than just a map. You can also tap and hold to get more information. So if we want the current METAR at DCA, we can quickly get to it. In addition, you can overlay some of the really useful data such as TFRs and radar. Here, we'll overlay radar and then let me zoom out so you can see it. But there's a downside to having a smaller area to display the chart, in that you have to manually zoom around to see where you are.
It's pretty easy at first to have your map zoomed to the wrong place. In other words, not where you currently are. So here's an aviation safety report where the pilot was so distracted zooming his map that he didn't realize he'd entered Class Delta airspace. His first clue was when he overflew the airport. I'll bet you that got the tower's attention.
There are two kinds of charts supported by the iPad, raster and vector. A raster image is simply a grid of pixels, and a vector image is a list of shapes to draw. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. The most obvious difference occurs when you zoom in on the image. A vector image will continue to look smooth as you zoom in, while a raster image will start to pixelate. So let's look at the differences between raster and vector charts and how they may affect you. When we look at the image drawn, we see that raster charts are basically scanned images of the paper aviation charts, whereas vector charts are rendered right on your iPad. What content is shown on the charts is also different. Raster charts have whatever content was originally placed on the paper chart, whereas with vector charts, you can dynamically select which content to display or to hide. The layout of the information also differs. On raster charts, cartographers carefully optimize the layout for readability as they're drawing the chart, whereas with vector charts, the layout is automatically determined by the software. Sometimes it looks good, and sometimes it doesn't. Finally, the file sizes differ quite a bit. Raster charts are quite large, whereas vector charts are fairly compact. You may need to keep this in mind as you quickly fill up your iPad with various charts. Let's show you some examples of different raster and vector images. Here we have an FAA low-altitude en route chart centered over Richmond, Virginia. And if you zoom it in, you see the content doesn't really change. However, it's nicely laid out and all the data is quite readable. And here we have the Jeppesen low-altitude en route chart also centered over Richmond, Virginia. And with all the data turned on, you can see it can get quite cluttered. But as we zoom in, you can see it cleans up quite nicely. In addition, it automatically added the airway MEAs and the sideways Ts that indicate MEA changes. So one of the issues with vector charts is that you may have to manage the layers of information as you zoom in and out. Sometimes you need to find the right level of zoom to expose the information you need.
So I do have an advisory for you. The JEP-FD vector chart should only be used for RNAV flight. They're missing some important chart data, for example, crossing radials, changeover points. If you look on the JEP-FD chart, those features are missing. So if you're using a vector application, make sure you spend some time with it to become familiar. Compare and contrast the vector chart against a paper chart and see what you lose. For now, if you are a JEP-FD user, make sure you take paper charts with you.
Additional to the advisory, we also have a caution for you. Not all apps contain all the charts you may need. You can see there's a long list of examples of charts or supplement data that may be missing from your favorite charting app. Make sure you take the time to investigate which apps have the charts you'll need. Bottom line, you need to make sure you have a total chart solution. One example of a total chart solution is Flight Guide IEFB. You can see here we are in a typical seamless sectional chart, and if we zoom in, you can see the terminal area charts embedded in the sectionals. However, there's some really important information on the Los Angeles terminal area chart. We can select to view the entire chart, and that allows us to look at the additional information that's placed around the edges. In this case, we can review the rules for transitioning the LAX Special Flight Rules area. The iPad makes it easy to carry more charts than you can fit into a flight bag. But before you take off with just your iPad, make sure you have a total chart solution.